Hello and hey, to mess around with Path of Exile. This time going to be going over an extremely risky starter in Explosive Concoction. I cannot stress this enough. This is barely a loose guide. The skill is to be considered experimental and only use it if you're okay with having a chance at a slow, terrible league start. It is a weaponless ranged attack that wants you to use flask slots to augment your damage. It is something that you should want to know everything about before using it, and we simply don't have all the facts just yet. We don't know if it's shotguns. It's unlikely, but we don't know for sure. How are the reduced flask charges gained from the patch going to influence how often we'll be able to augment the skill? We don't know that either. There are new nodes on the tree that seem to let us, have a steady supply, but we have not played with this new iteration yet. Fire damage component of the skill doesn't seem to likely be good enough damage, so if it doesn't shotgun, you've backed yourself into this weird weaponless corner. But I'm sure you get it, this is a risky starter, so even with that, I know some of you mad lads are still going to get after it, and I respect it. So take my suggestions and definitely watch some other people's videos to get all the perspectives you can for this brand new, exciting skill. Alright, starting with Ascendancy, I have a few for you. If you go Ascendant, you might not have the best time until after your second lab, depending on the flask charge changes. I'm not trying to beat that dead horse, but just stating, matter of factly. I know most people just want to use the skill as soon as they get it, not level through axe before switching, and I'm exactly the same way. But even so, I do think that we'll have to shoot straight for the Pathfinder node. That's my hunch. From there, you'll have to get to the Ranger starting position, so some regret points are kind of going to be inevitable unless you path straight there and do the reverse to the Witch. Whereas if we started Pathfinder, you get the first lab, boom, Nature's Boon, second lab, pow, Veteran Boyer. There's tons of flask charges in that, and we've already kind of in the area of those tasty new flask nodes. The problems for Pathfinder are going to be to get enough intelligence and missing out on that super powerful elemental overload without significant travel. It's pretty hard to gain generic global crit chance, so that travel will probably be necessary. But if it turns out to be a good skill, Pathfinder will look all the more attractive once you have some currency. Getting to stay on its part of the tree while utilizing clusters should prove very good, provided the skill does need to actually take advantage of you always having charges. Then the last one we'll touch on is Elementalist. Despite losing all the golem buffs, the Ascendancy is extremely well suited for this skill, and who'd have thought that? It's kind of in the name. But yes, the Master of Discord, Heart of Destruction nodes. If you wanted to push Ignite, you'd probably go with Shaper of Flames, but the scaling for Ignite is flatly not in a good place, and running a Ruby Flask with this skill probably just won't be good enough. So I'd suggest Shaper of Storms, letting all of our damage shock with that increased damage taken being generically powerful, and then closing it out with Bastion of Elements, because we're going to be hit more, so we got to tank through that stuff. By all means, these are not the only choices for the skill, but I thought they were some of the most effective on a low budget. Crit stuff is going to be most likely other Ascendancies, but I don't think that's a starter build, especially not on a skill this volatile. And I know Ascendant was a little bit of a weird choice, but if given a character just to start maps, I'd want to end up with the Ascendant's flexibility, but being a notoriously slow starter before this nerf patch, they are the hardest to recommend for sure. There's a ton of early nodes that will just be traveling to more generic damage. Wouldn't have any issues with the attributes, but damage output will be the lowest of the three. And that's a shame, as I said. I'd love to end up here, so maybe like my second or third character of the league, but by then the correct way to play this skill will have been discovered, and I'll have more currency for like a crit version if that ends up to be it, which Ascendant would probably not fit that bill. The Elementalist tree might not have to make the crazy travel to the bottom right if flasks aren't as hard to keep up as they seem like they will be, so that's a little bit of wishful thinking there. But it does give them plenty of options if they do get to stay in the top left to take advantage of cluster jewels, that massive AoE for free, turning into a more multiplier against uniques half the time. Damage will definitely be there for this class. It's just like how often will it benefit from the flask is really going to be the main issue. Then Pathfinder, as stated earlier, can make use of staying around her starting area, but Elemental Overload and some form of Elemental Equilibrium are going to be too hard to probably pass up. EE is going to be a little weird to get balanced, as you'll probably want to use Hydrosphere. So unless you want to use like Malachi's Artifice, Unique Ring to dumpster, probably cold damage in this instance with any cold skill you're comfortable using, you could free up a flask slot by doing so that might not be too hard of a thing to justify for opportunity cost. But at any rate, these trees are extremely unoptimized, looking for flask charge and duration stuff, elemental penetration with attacks, and all the generic damage we can see. So we'll go ahead and leave this here. I won't go too far into them, just saying that we're grabbing flasks, health, elemental pen, generic damage, etc. And for the skills, supporting it is fairly straightforward. Good old elemental damage with attacks as a no downside more multiplier. Trinity support, granted you've got enough lightning damage coming through to alternate it between fire and lightning to make, use of the gem. We'll go over some helpful auras for that in a bit though. Added lightning damage is a start towards that end. Greater multiple projectiles gives us much more coverage and more than likely doesn't apply a less damage, as we can probably assume it is strictly area damage and the projectiles is just to be able to spread further. Elemental penetration would be ideal, but you're not going to get your hands on that anytime soon, so we'll look to things like Inspiration, which was done 0 favors by all the mana changes, or Empower, which may be just the right call on a lot of builds now because they scale hard with levels for the most part. And maybe even something crazy if we never think of before, like faster attacks. I mean, if more than one flask can hit an enemy, like it can damage an enemy, Conk Effect is not going to be a good choice, but in the likely event that the enemies cannot be hit by more, like it doesn't shotgun, it will be the replacement of GMP in boss encounters, but being a different color is pretty unfortunate. Thus, I've included faster attacks to this list. Picking back up with that lightning damage we talked about, Wrath gives us all the additional lightning damage to get us up to a point, at least on a level 20 gem, while we have charges on our Topaz Flask, that we can start outpacing fire damage on the best rolls. And then Herald of Thunder adds a bit more to get us closer to 50-50, but will likely fall short without more deliberate intervention, though that is the nature of lightning damage. And another important note, Precision is a gem that gives you both accuracy and critical chance, and you'll need a source of accuracy for this skill, and so at hundreds, Precision is a great boost. It's something that you'll need to address either through that skill or items. Then Hydrosphere will serve as a dual-purpose exposure and curse applicator. Nothing complicated going on there, though it's worth bringing up again that this is what complicates EE, so exposure will be hard to come by without it, except for the cluster jewel notable corrosive elements, which we'll talk about again in a bit. Travel skills, traveling around will be smooth with our shield and shield charge, have boatloads of accuracy, so Fortify will pretty much come from anything that we pass through, which isn't always the case for shield users that focus on like an area damage skill, so that'll be nice. And then you add basically anything else you can think of. We're giving up only 3 maximum gem sockets to play this skill, so we're down to 21, and I guarantee that you can squeeze more juice from this, because I've only listed like 16 or 17. Throw in your Ice Golem or something like that if you're into a Malachi's Artifice, these types of things, but choose anything that you please or that think that you'll benefit from in the meantime. And with items, don't pay too close of attention to what you're seeing here. There's only some of the things that I mentioned in unique form, so they serve more as examples just of items more than actual recommendations. There's some shenanigans that you could pull, I'm sure, by using a quiver as a stat stick type of thing, especially earlier on instead of a shield. But there's like too much upside to having a shield, including movement, and it's literally just a shield here that I have in the slot. Getting down to boots, like at Xeres, are far from required. Dodge is good, movement speed's good, life's good. These are just, objectively good stats. Amulet here is focused on accuracy. Don't think I'd recommend this one, nor the Anoint. Was just looking at numbers, wanted to see how much accuracy you'd actually need to get up to 100. Malachi's Artifice would be good to try to get ego, like I was saying. Something like socketing your golem in here, as I said, or putting a brand in would work. You have to see what you like to do and what it would be effective on unique enemies. The melt, however, is important. I'd be interested to confirm if this actually works, but if you get to roughly 34% reduced flask charges, does your explosive concoction only start to use 2, or is that limited to flasks that you use? Need a high percentage here, and then there's an additional 15% on the tree, which could go a long way in always having charges if we do need the more generation. Would love to hear some confirmation as soon as we get that. And lastly, large elemental cluster gem with 8, 9, or 10 passives while having yet another notable, preferably a prefix. Elementalist augments the crap out of this, while the Pathfinder is definitely not turning that down. But that's about it. Like I said, this is super risky, more risky than most others because it's such a unique thing, focusing in on an entirely new concept in PoE. It will be a slow starter because of the pathing, and you'll also need to focus on flasks, let alone all the charges that you heard me jabbering about with them. It's a weird skill, but it's really cool. So please check down in the comments below for even better ideas of how to use this skill. I'm sure people will have some excellent ideas. Thank you in advance to all those that share. I hope that everybody has a great league start. So as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Be safe, guys.